Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon. The main topic of this short paper is the concept of jihad of the word, which is a concomitant which goes together with positive action. Bediüzzaman Said Nursi formulated this in the later period of his life under the Turkish Republic. His interpretation and practice of jihad in the old side period, therefore, is touched on only briefly. His ideas of the former period, however, shouldn't be completely disregarded, since in the 1950s he republished his works of the early period in which his ideas on jihad are found. That's included here are some of the main points concerning them. But before this, it will be useful to recall firstly the multiple meanings implied by the term jihad and its derivatives in the Quran and some hadiths. And secondly, and this is the purpose of jihad, that the Quran enjoins the Muslim community collectively and individually to strive by commanding good and forbidding evil to establish a just moral social order on the earth, and it introduced the concept of jihad to realize this. Very briefly, Bediüzzaman's ideas on jihad in the early period of his life may be summarized in the terms science, progress, and civilization, which shows that not only had he internalized the discourse of 19th century modernity, but also, along with the majority of the Ottoman ulama and intellectuals, he believed these values to be intrinsic to Islam and their adoption to be the sole hope for the empire's salvation. For Bediüzzaman, the true enemies of the Ottomans and the Islamic world were the internal foes that were the enemies of progress. These he epitomized as ignorance, poverty, and internal conflict, against which it was a religious duty to wage jihad. The Europeans were subjugating them with the weapons of science and industry. They therefore should wage jihad with the same weapons with their three internal enemies. External jihad should be referred to the proofs of the Sharia, for the civilized are to be conquered by persuasion. Of the three weapons he most frequently cited besides science and industry to combat the enemies of progress, namely the swords of education, human striving and labor and unity, education was clearly the most crucial and was the question on which he expended his greatest efforts during this early period of his life. Bediüzzaman's proposed reforms, which aimed to bring about the democratization and diversification of Medrese education, were also designed to assist in realizing the other two weapons that he considered essential for pursuing the struggle for progress: the production of enterprising, industrious individuals, and also social harmony and unity, the absence of which had all been clearly exploited by Europe. At the heart of his ideas concerning social development lay his belief in the principles of Islamic constitutionalism, that's mashruta mashrua, and the freedom prescribed by the Sharia, hurriyat sharia. He was a supporter of constitutional government and urged that it be founded on the Sharia, and he proposed the introduction of its democratic principles in many areas of life, not least in education, as mentioned. Bediüzzaman held constitutionalism to be synonymous with civilization and energetically employed every means to both enlighten the ordinary people concerning it and to engage them in the struggle to establish it. The people would have to strive to acquire science and to progress, and so to combat the three enemies of ignorance, poverty, and enmity, and also transcend the divisions of the traditionally segmented society and develop an awareness of nationhood. What Bediüzzaman was also striving to impress on the people was that all this endeavor entailed a moral struggle, in other words, to wage the greater jihad in their own selves with the lower self and to revive the Prophet's sunnah. He was hopeful that the egotism and widespread desire for domination that had caused conflict and disorder in the past would, in the prosperous future palace of civilization, be transformed into ideas and creativity, personal initiative and liberty. Moral jihad was also the basis of wider Islamic unity and the progress and development of the Islamic world, not politics. The salvation of the Islamic world was dependent on moral renewal and individual Muslims regaining an awareness of their membership of the Islamic nation. To move on to the New Side period, the New Side's jihad, Bediüzzaman's vision of an Islamic modernity and the building or rebuilding of Islamic civilization was incompatible with the objectives of Turkey's new leaders who gained control of the Ankara government and, having abolished the Sultanate and Caliphate, set their sights on building a modern Western-style nation-state on what remained of the Ottoman Empire. He thus withdrew from all social and political life, for he had understood that the irreligious trends he had perceived in the new capital would not be effectively combated through political struggle. Yet despite this, he was arrested in 1925, along with many hundreds of others, and sent into exile in Western Anatolia. Bediüzzaman did not adopt a confrontational stance towards the new regime and its government. Banished to a remote village, he started to compose short pieces proving the basic beliefs of Islam for the local people that aimed to preserve their belief and cultural identity in the face of the radical changes that were being wrought by the reforms. He remained entirely detached and engaged in no active or overt political activity of any sort. The copying out and dissemination of the pieces he wrote, called collectively the Risale-i-Nur, became the focal point of what, in time and despite the very adverse conditions, became a movement for religious renewal. Circumstances had forced Bediüzzaman to change his method of serving religion, that is, his method of jihad, but in that the Risale-i-Nur was essentially a didactic work, it not only performed important educative functions in the conditions of the times, but also acted as a modernizing force among the people of Anatolia, both of which had been goals of his jihad in the early period. Bediüzzaman coined two new phrases to describe the method followed by himself and his students in serving the Quran and belief with the Risale-i-Nur: Manevi jihad, which may be translated as moral jihad or jihad of the word, and positive action. These he linked to political and other developments in the world generally, whereby many countries, including Turkey, adopted for secular forms of government in which freedom of conscience and other liberties were accepted norms. He argued that in such a world, internal jihad, that is, striving to uphold the word of God and further the cause of God's religion within Muslim societies or countries, should take the form of a non-physical jihad with the sword of certain affirmative belief. It consists of a struggle of ideas that utilizes proofs so powerful they demonstrate almost visibly the guidance and truths of religion. The Risale-i-Nur is a great hero in this Manevi jihad, for its immaterial sword has solved hundreds of the mysteries of religion, leaving no need for physical swords. That's all a quote from his writings. It was the Quran-inspired method that Bediüzzaman had developed in the Risale-i-Nur for gaining what he called iman-ı tahkiki, or which I translate as certain affirmative belief, that led him to make such a claim, for it is based on a dynamic reading of the book of the universe, whereby, being ascribed directly to its maker, the cosmos with all its beings is seen to be a means of gaining knowledge of and certain belief in all the main teachings of the Quran related to belief, while refuting nature and causality, the mainstays of the scientism and materialist philosophies that had become the chief threat to Islam and religion generally, and in Turkey in particular. Another side of this jihad is moral renewal and strengthening, which is clearly an integral part of the renewal of belief and one of its chief aims. Even a cursory look at the Risale-i-Nur shows that its author continually makes ethical points and endeavors to inculcate the ethics and morality of the Quran and Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his readers. In fact, Manavi jihad might also be translated as moral jihad. One sense in which Bediüzzaman uses the term Manavi is in distinction to material, that's Maddi struggle. Political struggle in the name of religion he classifies as material. The most detailed definition he gave of Manavi jihad and its corollary, positive action, was in his last address to his students shortly before his death. From this, it is easy to see the points he was urgently trying to impress on them. These points that I was going to make here have been reiterated several times, so I'm not quite sure how many minutes I've got left. Kaç dakika? 5, okay. Okay, so I'm going to just skip that bit because it's all been discussed several times by a lot of speakers. And I'm just going to go on to a section which describes the practical struggle and the formation of the Nur community, which was a good example of a practical application in the very difficult years when the Risale-i-Nur was being written. Bediüzzaman's Jihad of the Word unfolded over the 23 years or so the Risale was composed between 1926 and 1949. He was alone when sent to his place of exile in the remote village of Bala in 1926, yet in the 8 years he remained there, the numbers of his students secretly writing out and disseminating his treatises swelled to hundreds, and by 1950 numbered tens of thousands, having spread throughout the country. It was the Risale-i-Nur students who, under his direction and knit into a community, conducted the Jihad of the Word with the weapons described above. Conditions were indeed testing for Bediüzzaman and his students, and progressively worsened over the period. The ban on both the publishing of religious materials and, after December 1928, the use of the Ottoman script, along with the absence of printing presses, made the writing and distribution of the Risale-i-Nur difficult and dangerous. The students suffered the constant threat of gendarme raids, arrest, detention, and mistreatment. Economic conditions also deteriorated over the period. Few of the students were people of means. Writing materials were hard to come by, and devoting their time to the Risale meant neglecting their own livelihoods. Bediüzzaman formed close relations with his students, and a constant underground flow of letters passed between them. He constantly encouraged them to strengthen their resolve in the struggle, that's the Mujahide, to spread the truths of belief, stressing its importance, especially when numbers of them suffered 3 terms of imprisonment together with him. Bediüzzaman had begun to emphasize union as a necessary condition for the Jihad of the Word, even before the scattered students had been brought together for the first time in their first imprisonment in 1934. For he considered the formation of a community and the collective personality it gives rise to essential to the sort of religious struggle he foresaw. In view of the general tendency in modern life for people to form associations, he wanted the Risale-i-Nur students to form a collective personality as the most effective way of carrying out their work, and also combating the collective personalities of the forces of misguidance and unbelief. Such a body might prevail where an individual would be defeated. He therefore impressed on the students the necessity of cultivating the moral qualities required to develop such a collective consciousness, the chief of which were sincerity and the renunciation of egotism. To engage in the moral struggle and possess oneself of these virtues was the essence of the Risale-i-Nur's way, and its strength was the reason for its successes. In conclusion, Bediüzzaman's intention in formulating jihad in terms of jihad of the word and positive action, was in order to combat what he considered posed the greatest threat to Islam and indeed to humanity in the 20th century, scientism, materialism, and materialist philosophy in all their various forms. The struggle between truth and falsehood in the modern age being an ideological and cultural struggle rather than one of force, the weapons of his jihad of the word were logical proofs of the truths of belief and reasoned argument and persuasion, which both executed with the sword of the Quran nature and causality, the basis of materialist philosophy, and dispelled the doubts they caused, and gained for a person certain and conscious belief, providing a base to develop true taqwa and Islamic morality. The jihad of the word also performed significant educative and modernizing functions within the overall changes that were being brought about in Turkish society. Bediüzzaman considered the prime duty of the new students to be firstly the maintenance of public order and security, even in the face of the oppression and injustice they themselves suffered, and secondly, to work for the unity and solidarity of society. Thank you very much. Sukran.